Hello, everyone at the Chat Live conference. Jim Al-Khalili here, and it's a pleasure to be able to record this video for you. Now, this is recorded well in advance. In fact, I gather the conference itself is February. I'm recording this in mid-November. You know, getting things done and out of the way, being very efficient. So, of course, we're in the middle of our November lockdown, and I'm doing all my work here from my study down in Portsmouth. As you can imagine, over the years, people like me, science communicators like me, Brian Cox and others, get lots of requests to give talks to schools, to science societies, science festivals and so on. And we can't say yes to all of them. Otherwise, we just wouldn't do anything else. So it's sort of one of the side effects of the awful pandemic that we find ourselves in at the moment is that saying yes more often, because we can record this stuff remotely from the comfort of our home without having to travel. And also it means that, you know, I don't have to make an effort. Here I am, I shave today. I'm just wearing my normal working from home attire, but then I'm assuming if this is all being done remotely, there aren't many of you wearing jackets and ties, right? Okay, so we're all casual here. So I wanted to say a little bit about, well, I guess the importance of physics education, but also a little bit about my work and my research. I'd like to think that you know me through some of my TV and radio broadcasts or my popular science writing, but I am a physicist as well. So I'll say a little bit about what I do in a moment. I think chat physics is a fantastic resource for school teachers. And indeed this week's conference, I gather it's more than just exchanging ideas on interesting stuff in physics. You're talking about teaching resources. You're talking about techniques, a lot of new things that we've had to sort of think up and develop during the pandemic. I know certainly that's the case for me, teaching my university students at Surrey, delivering my lectures. Okay, I'm not doing well, I should say, this is November 2020. I don't teach in the first semester. Come February, at the time you're watching this, that's when our second semester starts, and that's when I will be teaching my undergraduates. In fact, of course, on relativity theory. I don't know whether it's going to be done face-to-face or remotely. Certainly, you know, I'm using all the techniques from home, recording stuff using a visualizer, writing my lecture notes, uploading them onto the system, then holding tutorials over Zoom with the students. But it is vital. I mean, young people are going through such a tough time at the moment with their education, and the pressures on them, you know, with disruption to classes, disruption to examinations, you know, and this is their future we're talking about. And so for subjects, particularly STEM subjects like physics, it's absolutely vital that we maintain that level of enthusiasm about the subject. And I'm not just saying this as a university academic, and I want to make sure you guys provide us with a continuing stream of undergraduate physics students. You know, I worked as a admissions tutor in the department for many years, so I know that that's important. But of course, that's not what it's all about. Producing qualified graduates, and indeed those young people who don't go on to university, but you know, into further education. But qualifications in STEM subjects are so vitally important in the 21st century. Increasingly so, it seems, year on year. Even with the COVID pandemic, hopefully one day behind us, the challenges facing certainly the young people in the 21st century are daunting, whether it's climate change, environmental issues, whether it's new technologies, artificial intelligence, and so on. You know, we need, it's hard enough to infuse and excite and get more young people involved in subjects like physics, but it's also absolutely vital. So I was asked to say something about my work, what I do as a physicist. Last 15, 20, no, 20 years or more, I've really pretty much divided my time 50-50 between academic work, academic responsibilities, so that's teaching, research, university administration, and as a public scientist, outwardly facing, communicating science to society. I think before my generation of communicators came on the scene 25 or so years ago, it was frowned upon for a serious academic to engage too much with the outside world. You know, you were either an academic scientist who published papers, who wrote research grants and supervised PhD students and taught undergraduates, or you were a communicator who wrote popular science books, presented TV programs or whatever. I was, I guess, one of the first people to say, no, I want to do both. I want to be, I want to have the respectability of an academic scientist, of someone who still does science, who still does research, the credibility. But at the same time, I do understand the importance of not just talking to each other. I remember back in the early 90s, it occurred to me that I probably would spend months working on some aspect of theoretical physics research, writing codes, developing mathematical models, publishing a paper in a review journal that is then read by a dozen people around the world. But I could spend an afternoon writing a 1,000-word article for a newspaper about some aspect of physics that is equally important, maybe not at such a high technical level, but that will be read by 500,000 or 1 million people. And I thought, you know, how do you judge one against the other? Neither one on its own is enough, I think, in science. You know, we have to have the peer-reviewed research. That's how science progresses. But at the same time, we can't just talk to each other. You know, we have to justify what we do. We have to explain what we do. We have to inspire the next generation. We have to help develop a more scientifically literate society, and so on. But I guess if you know anything about my sort of public persona, then I should say something about my research interests. I did a PhD in theoretical nuclear physics, nuclear reaction theory, back in the late, and for many years, my research was in nuclear physics. So having finished my PhD at University of Surrey, I went to University College London for a postdoc position for 2 years, then returned to Surrey, because back then, as almost it is now, the University of Surrey has the largest nuclear theory research group in the UK. So that was the place to be if that's the research that I was doing. And I was modeling the structure of atomic nuclei, particularly those with rather sort of exotic properties, so very neutron-rich nuclei. The simplest example is an isotope of helium, helium-6. Now, of course, you know, the standard isotopes are helium-3 and helium-4, the alpha particle, right? 2 protons for helium plus 1 or 2 neutrons. Well, helium-6, of course, has 4 neutrons. And the structure 6 is very unusual because you get 2 of the neutrons binding with the 2 protons to make a tight alpha particle core. The other 2 neutrons sort of float around the outside of the alpha particle. Not out to the extent of electrons in a helium atom, but certainly spending more than their time beyond the range of the strong nuclear force that is gluing them into the nucleus in the first place. This is a purely quantum mechanical effect. Those 2 neutrons tunnel out of the nuclear core and form what we call the neutron halo. Many years throughout the 90s to the noughties, doing research, publishing papers on the properties of neutron halos and developing computer codes to calculate their properties in a reaction. So in a nuclear accelerator, if you fire a beam of helix at a target, what happens to the particles? How do they interact? How do they bounce off? How do they scatter? There's sort of an advanced version of Rutherford's or Geiger and Marsden's alpha scattering experiment, only without alpha, not alpha particles, not helium-4, but helium. So helium-6 is very unstable. It only lives for a second. Very, very weakly bound. You know, you sneeze and those 2 halo valence neutrons will fall off. And interestingly, from a theoretical perspective, helium-5 doesn't exist in a bound form. So you've got helium-4, the alpha particle, the two neutrons. If you remove one of them, the other neutron will not remain bound to the alpha particle, so it also falls off. So the helium-6 only exists because of the two neutrons acting together. And so we model it as what we as a P-body system, core plus two neutrons. So that's what I was developing, the quantum mechanical properties of such three-body systems for which no two-body subsystem can exist. Well, my work in nuclear reaction theory has sort of come to an end over the past few. Most of my research papers, roughly about 100 research papers, most of them have been in nuclear physics. But I have now moved over to a slightly new area, very exciting for me, called open quantum systems. You see, in quantum mechanics, you know, the theory of the subatomic world, when we teach it to undergraduates, we're really only ever talking about isolated quantum systems. You know, what does this hydrogen atom look like? What are the energy levels? You know, how does an electron with another electron and so on? But in the real world, of course, quantum systems are never in isolation. They exist within a larger environment. And that larger environment causes what we call decoherence, the decay or the disappearance of the counterintuitive effects of the quantum world. You know, the superposition, how can an apple be in two places at once? Quantum tunneling, how can a particle burrow its way through an energy barrier, a force field, when it doesn't have enough energy to do so? Or quantum entanglement, how can two separated particles somehow be in instantaneous communication with each other such that measuring one of them instantly affects the properties of the other? So these are weird quantum effects that we've got in physics and chemistry. They happen down the subatomic world, but we really struggle to study them unless we can isolate that system from its surroundings. That's why, you know, experiments in laboratories, in physics laboratories, trying to understand the quantum world tend to be carried out within very carefully controlled environments, you know, near absolute temperature, in a vacuum, surrounded, shielded by from the outside disturbances of the world. Well, open quantum systems, the area I'm working in now, actually confronts that issue, that no quantum environment is separated from its things. And that leads to all sorts of philosophical and interpretational issues in quantum mechanics, you know, like the measurement problem, you know, when by the acts of the observer affecting the system, you know, cats in boxes, dead and alive at the same time until you open the box. Well, in open quantum systems, it's the surrounding environment itself carries out the observations. It doesn't need a human observer or someone with a white lab coat and a PhD carry out the observation. The surrounding environment interacts with the system, and its quantum nature seeps away like heat dissipating from a hot object in a cooler environment. And the reason I got involved in open quantum systems, which is a highly, you know, mathematical, highly theoretical area, and therefore fun for me, is because of a new interdisciplinary research field called quantum biology. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a book with my colleague at University of Surrey, John Joe McFadden, called Life on the Edge, which is to date still the only popular science book on biology. So if you're keen to find out more, then maybe look for that book, Life on the Edge. Quantum biology is this new area which brings together physicists, chemists, biologists to explore what we're now discovering is taking place inside living cells, which is that there are certain mechanisms that only work thanks to quantum mechanics. So while physicists and chemists have used quantum mechanics, and although they may be still baffled by it, they sort of, you know, they've taken it for granted. Biologists don't use quantum mechanics. And yet, you know, molecular biology is dealing with atoms and molecules down at the level where the quantum world kicks in. And it turns out that actually, in some circumstances, it's important to explore the quantum implications of what's going on inside living cells. For example, the action of enzymes. You know, enzymes in a cell, these are proteins that accelerate certain reactions. They're the forces of the cell. Well, some of the things the enzymes do would only work thanks to quantum mechanics. Things like moving a particle from one part of a biomolecule to another, moving a proton, say, a hydrogen bond, and doing it using the trickery of the quad, like quantum tunneling. So I got interested in this area, and I realized that, you know, the big thing we need to understand is, how can quantum mechanics take place inside living cells? Isn't it too hot, messy in the environment? Doesn't the quantum effects just decohere and leak away very, very quickly, far more quickly than the timescale of any biological processes? Well, it turns out that somehow life has evolved the ability to maintain these quantum effects so that they do play a role. But in order to study these quantum effects inside living cells, led me to trying to understand the nature of open quantum systems. Luckily, I have colleagues at Surrey who have past expertise in this area, and so they, together with them, we're supervising PhD students, and now I'm starting to publish papers in this area. So we have the world's first doctoral training center in quantum biology. John Joe McFly, co-author of the Life on the Edge, and I was successful in getting a big research grant to set up this doctoral training center, training, supervising PhD students, you know, who would come to us from backgrounds in biology, in computational chemistry, in theoretical physics, and doing their PhDs within this fantastically exciting interdisciplinary research environment. So that's happening at Surrey. I've just set up a foundation center in the physics department, because I've realized that studying these open quantum systems, as I mentioned earlier, really hits some of these hugely important foundational interpretational questions about quantum mechanics. That's one of the things that has really driven my research throughout my career. Quantum mechanics is so successful, and yet we don't know what the heck is going on. You know, how can a particle be in two places at once? You know, how can two particles that are quantum entangled communicate with each other when no information can travel faster than the speed of light? And quantum mechanics is the only theory in all of science that seems to have got away with having multiple narratives, multiple ways of explaining what are the so-called interpretations of quantum mechanics. There's the standard textbook interpretation called the Copenhagen view, which was developed by the founding fathers like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and Pauli. But there are other views. You know, Einstein famously never agreed with Niels Bohr about how to interpret quantum mechanics. Einstein felt that somehow quantum mechanics was incomplete. We still don't know to what extent Einstein was right. We've closed the doors on some of his concerns, but there are still others. You know, there's the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that every time a quantum particle, like an electron, say, is faced with a choice, do I go this way or that way? Do I have this energy or that energy? The whole universe branches out into two, and this should extend all the way out to the macro world. So Schrodinger's cat in the box that's dead and alive at the same time, before you open the box, that forces the entire universe to branch into one in which you see a live cat and one in which you see a dead cat. That's a perfectly valid and respectable way of explaining the mystery of the quantum world. And there are many other interpretations. So I think one of the things I'm doing now is I'm not approaching the end of my career, but, you know, I'm starting to see a decade from now, I'll be thinking about, well, I won't be thinking about retiring, I will be retiring. What do I want to do with the last few years of my research career? And so I'm picking and choosing those areas that I actually find fascinating and interesting. I no longer have that pressure on me that I have to publish or perish. You know, I can pick and choose what interests me. So I think I should stop talking, otherwise I'll just go on forever talking about my research. I'm not quite sure at what stage of your weeks virtual gathering, this video will be shown. If it's at the end, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you have you've had a very thoroughly fulfilling time. If it's at the beginning, then well, good luck and have lots of fun. But you know, thanks for listening. Okay, goodbye.